us a good dose of your Holy Spirit as we face some troubling times. Bless us in Jesus' name, amen. Well, it is kind of difficult times, as you may have noticed. So I decided to title this one, 2021 will be better, right? It's been a bit of 2020. I think I found this photograph this morning. 2020 has been a bit of a dumpster fire, wouldn't you agree? And there are a lot of things that have been happening, and my personal view is that 2021 is probably going to be more of the same. The optimist in me says that it's not going to get any worse. But as I look around, if we're looking at these things from a purely secular human view, it is a very strange world. How many times, I know Pam and I sit around and we talk, and we say, this is really weird, right? This world, does it seem really weird to you? And she's like, yeah, it does seem really weird to me. You go places and there's nobody around, and these lockdowns, and 2020 I will remember as the first time in 40 years that I didn't fly any place or stay in a hotel, unless something changes in the next 10 days, 11 days. But that's unusual. That's a very unusual year for me. And we talk about the convergence of events, the fact that we live in a pretty disrupted world now. Just a couple of housekeeping things. I do have my updates put up on Remnant Truth Network, rtntv.org. You can find them there. You can also get the the Remnant Truth Network app. The audio is posted at Christian Sentinel on Blog Talk Radio. It's usually up by mid-afternoon on Sunday. And then we also have started a Rumble account. I think it's called Real FBC. It's a little hard to find things on Rumble. I think what Brian will do is he'll post the link to Rumble in the YouTube description. And I'll also do that on my Facebook page and on, I think, my Twitter account and whatever other, maybe Parler. I don't know. I have too many social media accounts now. I need a social media manager, I think, to manage all of these. But I want to start off with a passage of Scripture, and I've alluded to this before in the past because I think it's a good example of how we should respond in, whether you want to describe it as desperate times, trying times, difficult times, but certainly it is. I have always gotten a lot of messages and emails. That has increased by at least 50 to 75% over the past couple of weeks. So here's the passages from Daniel chapter 9. So Daniel's there. He's reading the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He's been in captivity since the first group was taken away. So he's been there. We'll find out soon in the passage that he's been there 70 years in Babylon. He's probably in his 80s, late 80s now. He's served in government. He's served in high levels of government, done so very successfully. So he writes this, Daniel chapter 9, verse 1. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the seed of the Medes, which was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. And what he was reading was what we now know as Jeremiah chapter 25, which says this, starting at verse 9. Behold, this is Jeremiah prophesying what's going to happen to the kingdom of Judah, because the kingdom of Judah, and there are plenty of examples of this, it's laid out in great detail in Jeremiah, also in Ezekiel, and particularly even after the captivity started, Ezekiel had a vision, which you can read in Ezekiel chapter 8, that tells of the things that are going on in Jerusalem. And really, it's being led, the apostasy, the untruth, the false religion, the false worship. It's being led by the elders of Israel, by the priests. And it's happening in the temple, precinct, God's holy place. And Ezekiel, as I said, Ezekiel writes about that in Ezekiel chapter 8, what's going on, and then the aftermath of what would be coming in the last invasion of the Babylonians in 586 BC is talked about in Ezekiel chapter 9. So in Jeremiah 25, verse 9, the prophet Jeremiah says this, "Behold, I will send and take all the families of the north, saith the Lord, and Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and will bring them against this land and against the inhabitants thereof, and against all these nations round about, and will utterly destroy them and make them an astonishment and a hissing and perpetual desolations. Moreover, I will take from them the voice of mirth, the voice of gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride, the sound of the millstones and the light of the candle." What's going to happen in Judah is life is going to cease as they know it. No weddings, no millstones, no commercial activity, no light. The light is being extinguished. And then in verse 11, Jeremiah talks about how long this is going to last. "And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years." So here was Daniel reading the scroll of the prophet Jeremiah. So we can make some conclusions from this. Jeremiah was a real person. Jeremiah wrote the scripture. Just like when Jesus cites Daniel, it's pretty easy to conclude that Daniel wrote Daniel. But Daniel sees this is going to cease after 70 years. And the reason for that, that's over in 2 Chronicles, what happened was that they had disobeyed God. They had not honored God's law, which required a Sabbath year of rest every 7th year. And when you add those up to this time of Daniel, there had been 70 Sabbath years that they had not followed what God said. So God says, I'm going to take you out of the land. And it says in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, "Therefore he brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all unto his hand." You can read about that in Ezekiel chapter 9. And they're going forth to destroy the people. Now, there's a remnant that's protected with the seal of God, and I've talked about that. You can look that up. But here's what he said, "And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king, and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. And them that had escaped from the sword carried he away to Babylon, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the king of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths, and for as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath, to fulfill 70 years. So Daniel was well aware of the passage in Jeremiah. It said, you didn't do what I said. If you do what I said, in fact, if you go back to Shechem, it's located in modern Nablus. Ancient Shechem sat there in the middle of a valley, of sort of a V, a natural amphitheater. You had Mount Gerizim to the left, and the distance between the top of Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal is about a mile. So you had this natural amphitheater, and what they did in Deuteronomy chapter 25 was they put 6 tribes on Mount Gerizim above Shechem, and 6 tribes on Mount Ebal. And the Levites were in Shechem. There was a temple area there. And what they did was on Mount Ebal, they shouted, they addressed the curses of what would happen if they didn't follow God's law. And on Mount Gerizim, they addressed, it was the blessings. And it was not that this was just a small gathering of 40 or 50 people. There were, my estimate is that there may have been 2 million people or more involved in this process. And I'm sure to the people that lived around, as they're shouting these blessings and cursings back and forth across this valley, I'm sure that the locals were kind of like, what is going on over there? Who are these people? And you can go to Shechem today. It's a little difficult to get to, but I've been there. And you can really grasp what happened. And in fact, Mount Ebal is the curses. And it's kind of a rocky, not so great place. On Shechem, they actually had terraces for farming. So you get blessings if you do follow the law. You get curses if you don't. And so all of this played out over history. So they did this at the beginning of near the beginning of the conquest. And then they forgot. They didn't keep the Sabbath year. And so God said, okay, listen, I told you what's going to happen. You're going to get the curses. You're out of here for 70 years. Because you haven't kept my word, I'm going to make you. Now, Daniel's reaction to this was very interesting. Daniel was not like, all right, 70 years, I'm packing my bags, I'm getting my ticket, and I'm on my way home to Israel. That's not what he did. And I think what Daniel did is a good example of how we ought to react in this time of crazy turmoil that we live in. Now, look, I focus a lot on the United States because that's where I live. But I read a lot of newspapers all over the place, and I'm seeing things. I'll talk about a few of them in a moment. This is happening all over the world. We are not isolated. And everywhere people are in turmoil and suicides are up. But Daniel's reaction was, this is what Daniel did. Daniel was one of the most godly men in Scripture. Here's what he did. And I set my face unto the Lord God to seek by prayer and supplications with fasting and sackcloth and ashes. No, none of what he did was getting out of here. He needed to deal with what he saw as the heart issue that still existed among his people. And I prayed unto the Lord my God and made my confession and said, O Lord, the great and dreadful God, keeping the covenant and mercy to them that love him and to them that keep his commandments. By the way, I'm not going to go into the 70 weeks thing at the end and the confirming of the covenant or anything. But it's interesting, there's a lot of controversy about what the covenant is in Daniel 9, 26, 27. Well, Daniel talked about a covenant early on in the chapter. Maybe we ought to go find out what that covenant was about to find out what the covenant is that gets confirmed later on. That's just it's totally off topic. But he continues, we have sinned and have committed iniquity and have done wickedly and have rebelled, even by departing from thy precepts and from thy judgments. Neither have we hearkened unto thy servants, the prophets, which spake in thy name to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, and to all the people of the land. O Lord, righteousness belongeth unto thee, but unto us confusion of faces, as at this day. To the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, unto all Israel that are near and that are far off, through all the countries whither thou hast driven them, because of their trespass that they have trespassed against thee. O Lord, to us belongeth confusion of face, to our kings, princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against thee. To the Lord our God belong mercies and forgiveness, though we have rebelled against him. Neither have we obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to walk in his laws, which he set before us by his servants the prophets. Yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, because we have sinned against him. And he hath confirmed his words, which he hath spake against us and against our judges that judged us, by bringing upon us a great evil. For under the whole heaven hath not been done as hath been done upon Jerusalem. And you know what? It's coming again. As it is written in the law of Moses, all this evil has come upon us, yet made we not our prayer before the Lord our God, that we might turn from our iniquities and understand thy truth. Therefore hath the Lord watched upon the evil and brought it upon us. For the Lord our God is righteous in all his works which he doeth. For we obeyed not his voice, and now O Lord our God, thou hast brought thy people forth out of the land of Egypt with a mighty hand, and hast gotten thee renown. As at this day we have sinned, we have done wickedly. O Lord, according to all thy righteousness, I beseech thee, let thine anger and fury be turned away from the city of Jerusalem, thy holy mountain, because for our sins and for the iniquities of our fathers, Jerusalem and thy people are become a reproach to all that are about us. Now therefore, O Lord our God, hear the prayer of thy servant and his supplications, and cause thy face to shine upon thy sanctuary that is desolate for the Lord's sake. O my God, incline thine ear and hear, open thine eyes and behold our desolations in the city which is called by thy name. For we do not present our supplications before thee for our righteousnesses, but for thy great mercies. O Lord, hear. O Lord, forgive. O Lord, hearken and do. Defer not for thine own sake, O my God, for thy city and thy people are called by thy name. And whiles I was speaking and praying and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain of my God. And he goes on and he has an encounter, and he gets an additional prophecy. And it's interesting because the prophecy, this has been a prophecy about 70 years. And then the prophecy he's going to get is not 70 years, it's 77s. It's a different thing. But the attitude of Daniel, I think, was exactly scripturally correct. When he saw these things, and I don't think, if I read through the book of Daniel, the last person I think that needs to be repenting much because of the way he lived was Daniel. And yet he did on behalf of himself and all his people, because he knew that they had sinned against God. Yet he also trusted that God was going to keep his promise to limit the period of time, the desolations of Jerusalem. And God will be faithful again in the future. The pattern will follow through. So let's keep that in mind. Let's look at some things. This is, again, our little The Economist, which tries to predict. It's kind of interesting. Now, I'm not a slot machine player, okay? But I've seen people win. And when do they usually win big? They get a row of sevens, right? 7, 7, 7, 21. Now, some people interpret that to mean that, these people who are in charge of the world are going to do things in 2021. Like they haven't done a lot of stuff in 2020. But we live in a very strange time. Now, this is weird. Or this is, we talk all these things about end times Bible prophecy. We talk about the mark of the beast and the chip and this and Israel and a confirmation of the covenant and everything. But in the background, there's all these things going on. There's these economic things, technology things. And then there's this is one that I talk about a lot, is the demographic thing, which the world is changing. So what you see here in this chart is you go across the top and you have you see the bell curve. That's pretty much a distribution. Younger people at the bottom, older people at the top. And that's what the first line across is the distribution of population in 1960. And it does Brazil, India, China, Nigeria, South Africa, UK, Italy, USA, Japan, and what's the last one? South Korea. And you can see that sort of the younger countries that were growing, they're pretty much standard bell curves. They're the good distribution, younger people at the top. But as you go across, you start to see the change at China, South Africa, but look at the UK, Italy, and the USA. They're not a standard bell curve because what was already happening 60 years ago was that the distribution of people was changing. There weren't a great number of young people. It was already shrinking, and you were getting more and more old people. Well, that trend has only accelerated over time. And so here you see 1990 and 2020. And if you could move down just one more, Brian, to 2050. And then look at how the world population changes. And so what they did there was the black lines in each of near the distribution, that shows what it was in 1960. So you can see how it's changed. And what you see is, I mean, look over here. This is South Korea. And then Japan, the two in the lower right-hand corner. Look at how those are changed. They got a lot of old people. And so when you look at this, now that's what's projected for 2050. It's already that way in 2020. And this has enormous economic consequences and impacts. And so when you look at it, it's one of these things where the world's in tremendous change just because of the demographics alone. I mean, so you look at that, the second one in from the right, in the lower right, is Japan. Look at how many old people they have, their distribution. They don't have any young people. That's why when you read things about Japan and they say that they sell more adult diapers than child diapers in Japan, pretty easy to figure out. It's actually a demographic fact. But this has huge impacts. I mean, it costs a lot of money to take care of old people and that type of thing. One country that in the 1, 2, 3, 4 from the left is Nigeria. Look, they're still in a bell curve thing. That's why when I did that thing about a year ago, I talked about, they're talking about cities of 90, 95, 100, 110, 120 million people. And there'll be 5 or 6 of these cities in Africa if things don't change. And there's cities you never even heard of. They're going to have New York City, 8 million people. It's a huge city. London, I think, is a similar size. Mexico City is 25 million, I think. So you're going to have 5 or 6 cities in Nigeria and other parts of Africa that are 5, 6 times as big as Mexico City. It's incredible what the change will be if the Lord doesn't return. But all of this is just having a big impact now on budgets, governments, defense budgets, that type of thing. So that's here. Now, this is a tweet that I found. She calls her, this person calls, I don't even know how to describe these things anymore because I don't know their gender pronouns. I saw there was a Zoom conference this week. I don't know if I have the slide from it. Everybody said, I use he, they pronouns. Or I use she, they pronouns. So now so you got this profile for everybody in the Zoom call, and you're supposed to refer to them by this. But here's what she says. This is this thing we talked about with transgender and puberty blockers and that type of thing. She says this. She calls herself the adult demon female. So you kind of know that maybe she's just not quite all there. If children can't consent to puberty blockers, which pause any permanent changes, even with the relevant professional evaluation, how can they consent to the permanent and irreversible changes that come with their own puberty with no professional evaluation whatsoever? And what does she advocate? Give puberty blockers to every child until they reach the age of 18, then they can decide what they want to do. And to her, it's easily reversible. It's just a pill. Stop taking the pill, everything will be fine. Really? By the way, I didn't have time to put it in. There was a series of articles in the, about a week or a little over a week ago in the Times of London, which was talking about, remember these challenges where they were sort of encouraging kids to go get puberty blockers in the UK? Well, fortunately, the High Court in the UK said they can't consent to that. We don't let children consent to that sort of thing, so you really need to stop. And of course, what does the National Health Service in the UK, what's their reaction been? Well, we're going to find a way around this because we don't have to follow the law because, we're about justice and dignity of the individual. And it's easy to rail against this stuff because it's secular, right? So now there's a new group that has come out with some things. And I'm going to, it's called this, Declaring the Sanctity of Life and the Dignity of All. Essentially what they have said is, these are, and it's a declaration, everybody's got a statement, and you can sign the declaration and you can go to their website and you can find out who signed this thing. They're saying, stop all conversion therapy. Don't try to counsel anyone or pray for anyone or anything like that to get them to not be homosexual. You can't even pray for them. But this isn't a secular group. It claims to be a Christian group. And if you don't believe it, here's a video that they put up. Listen, look at this. Declaring the sanctity of life and the dignity of all.
We come together as senior religious leaders, academics and lay leaders from around the world to affirm the sanctity of life and the dignity of all.
We affirm that all human beings of all sexual orientations, gender expressions, and gender identities are a precious part of creation and are part of the natural order.
We affirm that we are all equal under God, whom many call the divine, and that we are all therefore equal to one another. We call for all to be treated equally under the law.
We recognize with sadness that certain religious teachings have often, throughout the ages, caused and continue to cause deep pain and offense to those who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex.
We acknowledge with profound regret that some of our teachings have created and continue to create oppressive systems that fuel intolerance, perpetuate injustice, and result in violence. This has led and continues to lead to the rejection and alienation of many by their families, their religious groups, and their cultural communities.
We ask for forgiveness from those whose lives have been damaged and destroyed on the pretext of religious teaching.
We believe that love and compassion should be the basis of faith and that hatred can have no place in religion.
We call on all nations to put an end to criminalization on the grounds of sexual orientation or gender identity, for violence against LGBT individuals to be condemned, and for justice to be done on their behalf.
We call for all attempts to change, suppress, or erase a person's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression, commonly known as conversion therapy, to end, and for these harmful practices to be banned.
Finally, we call for an end to the perpetuation of prejudice and stigma, and commit to work together to celebrate inclusivity and the extraordinary gift of our diversity.
So that's a Christian group. It goes under the name the Global Interfaith Commission on LGBT Plus Lives. Global Interfaith .net or .org or Don't go sign it, obviously. I don't think you would do that. But did you see what the one guy said? We don't want anybody to change someone's orientation. But it's okay for us to change, like cut off body parts to change. That's okay. These people are, this is Romans 1 in full operation. They are reprobate minds, and they have lost the ability to reason, and they claim to be Christian, although they had some Hindu, and they also had a Muslim saying this. I don't know how that would go if he went back and said that in a mosque in Iran or someplace. And then there's this, have you seen these pictures of this nativity scene at the Vatican this year? To say that it's bizarre is a little bit, it's like, it's sort of like encapsulates everything that has gone wrong at the Vatican. Even though, look, I don't think Roman Catholicism is a true Christian religion. It's been corrupted, but these guys they're way off the reservation now. They're having Earth Day celebrations, praying to Mother Earth and Goddess Gaia, and now they have this nativity scene, which is this kind of modern, almost looks like, sort of like a trashy version of Darth Vader is like one of the shepherds, or Joseph. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like the aliens have taken over. This is an article in the Epoch Times. Look, I'm not going to talk too much about the election. You can find all sorts of things on the internet about the different views as to what's being done. I will only say that most of the court challenges are, they're still going through the process, but even though the judge, like there was a judge up in Michigan that found some problems with some voting machines, or at least, cause to look into it, he essentially says, well, we'll have a hearing in April. And I think Sidney Powell, two of her cases are going to be heard in the Supreme Court of the United States on January 14th. And they're going to count the electoral votes on January 6th. And there's a lot of theories as to what's going to happen. And some people are advocating for martial law. So you can go read about all that. I don't really have time to talk. I could really go down that rabbit hole. I think we'll have a good idea what's going to happen on January 6th. Now, I've jokingly referred to this as the Biden administration. And I found this clip of the O part of the Biden administration, who did a little interview with Stephen Colbert. Now, listen, he can say, Colbert's a comedian, so it was a joke, right? That he always has a cover story. But here's what our former president said when he was asked about, what do you think about a third term for yourself?
What you know now, do you wish like you had a third term? And I used to say, you know what, if I could make an arrangement where I had a stand-in, a front man or front woman, and they had an earpiece in, and I was just in my basement in my sweats, looking through the stuff, and then I could sort of deliver the lines, but somebody else was doing all the talking and ceremony. Wow. I'd be fine with that.
Look, think back when he was leaving office. I did a pretty significant segment back in early 2017 about or late 2016 about an organization that he had set up called Organizing for Action. Had tens of millions of dollars of funding, 5 million volunteers. I haven't heard much about that. That makes me nervous. I just don't think it went away after he spent all that time. It was called Organizing for Action. And then also remember during the Obama administration, billions of dollars of settlements in these financial cases against the mortgage-backed security people and that type of thing. Those were all funneled through entities and eventually went to left-wing groups. And it was billions of dollars. So I don't think this was a joke. That's my opinion. There's this was also published this week. It's always interesting on the timing of these things because somebody sent this to me last night and I said, I talked about that 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I went back and looked through all my slides and couldn't find it. I'm like, I know I talked about it. Well, I didn't. I had downloaded it 3 days before and intended to put it in this week's presentation. That's where it was. And so it just shows you how the time is. And this is the Secular Democrats of America, restoring constitutional secularism and patriotic pluralism in the White House. Now, what do you think this is going to do? This is get the Christians out. That's what this is. So they have, and they have like all these things that they want to roll back that the Obama administration did. And they have dozens of pages and, you know, all the departments and this regulation and that regulation that they want to get rid of. And we want to get rid of anything that smacks of Christianity, essentially, is what they want to do. And so they have a caucus membership, and they call it the Free Thought Caucus membership. And it's always interesting, the language that they use. But look at who some of these people are. Jamie Raskin, Steve Cohen, Pramila Jayapal, Eleanor Holmes Norton, Rashida Tlaib. That's the Free Thought Caucus? I don't think so. So you're going to see a lot of this, and I could go on and on and on about this, but I'm concerned about some things that I'm seeing. Seattle is sort of a microcosm for things that are going on. Now, I've talked about the Los Angeles County District Attorney, Garcon, and the things that he's done to do away with bail and that type of thing. There are a couple of documentaries out there. One is called Seattle. They're done by KOMO. You can find them on YouTube. Seattle is Dying. And then another one just recently released, and I don't remember the name of it. I would recommend, if you want to know where this is going, go look at these things. Look, Seattle is a beautiful city. It's spectacular. Its location and that sort of thing. But it's been destroyed by these policies. And it's getting worse. So here is an article by the great writer Christopher Rufo, who writes for the Discovery Institute and City Journal and others, a new article titled The New Untouchables. Now listen to this. In October, the Seattle City Council floated legislation to provide an exemption for prosecution for misdemeanor crimes for any citizen who suffers from poverty, homelessness, addiction, or mental illness. Under the proposed ordinances, courts would have to dismiss all so-called crimes of poverty, which, according to the city's former public safety advisor, would cover more than 90% of all misdemeanor cases citywide. In effect, the legislation would create a new class of untouchables protected from consequences by the city's power brokers. This is the latest and most brazen effort in the city's campaign to establish what might be called a reverse hierarchy of oppression. The underlying theory is that society has condemned the lower class to a life of poverty and stigma, which leads to addiction, madness, and indigence. The poor, in the logic of Seattle's progressive elites, are thus forced to commit crimes, including violent crimes, to secure their very existence. Therefore, society is the perpetrator of this inequality. The crimes of the poor must be forgiven. The crimes are transformed into an expression of social justice. And it goes on. So all these cases will go away. And if you look at the latest documentary from KOMO about this, it's done. Now, what they did was this did not pass, but what some of these left-wing city councilmen tried to do was they tried to sneak it in as a budget item. So they said, well, we have a budget. We need to lower the budget for our jail and incarceration and everything because we're not going to prosecute these people for these crimes again. So they won't be in the jail. We need less money. We need less police and all this stuff. It was a backdoor way to do it. Unfortunately, some people caught on to it. And even in Seattle, they said, well, maybe we need to reconsider this. But that's the way it goes. Here's another article from Christopher Rufo at the Discovery Institute, Indoctrinating an Entire School System in PC Racism. Seattle School District claims education system is guilty of spirit murder against black children. And they've had these training sessions. You can go and you can watch the the slides and all of this of what they claim that they're doing. What's the goal of these inflammatory racial equity programs? In a word, to transform Seattle schools into activist organizations. At the conclusion of the training, teachers must explain how they will practice anti-racist pedagogy, address the current social justice movements taking place, and become anti-racist outside the classroom. They are to divide the world into enemies, allies, and accomplices, and work towards the abolition of whiteness. They must, in other words, abandon the illusion of neutral teaching standards and get in the trenches of race-based activism. And this is happening everywhere. The Dalton School in New York, which is a very prestigious private school, I think tuition for a child is between $50,000 and $60,000 a year for elementary and secondary school. So here's some of the things that the teachers are demanding. So some of the schools in New York are back, but not this one. The teachers are making demands. They want to reroute 50% of all donations to New York City public schools. They want to pay off the student debt of incoming black faculty. Hiring of multiple psychologists with specialization on the psychological issues affecting ethnic minority populations. Required courses on black liberation. Reduce tuition for black students whose photographs appear in school promotional materials. Overhaul of entire curriculum to reflect diversity narratives. It's insanity. Now, in connection with the election, look, lawyers took on these cases, and they filed these cases, and so now there is a push there are hundreds of lawyers organizing to take away the law licenses and destroy the careers of people who supported the challenges in the election. This has never happened before. And here's one from the Attorney General of Michigan. She says, fun fact, lawyers who practice in Michigan are required to take an oath to support the Michigan and U.S. constitutions, not to file unjust and or frivolous actions or mislead the court. The spate of Trump lawsuits in our state violates each of these tenets. It demeans our profession. That's where it's going. Now, COVID. I'm not going to talk too long about this. This is from this morning's London Times, the Times of London, Sunday Times. London has gone into a complete, total lockdown. And if you get this, and you can see the red is where people are not supposed to go anywhere. There's all these different tiers. So the lighter colored tiers in the UK are like tier 1, and there's tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. And somebody wrote to me, and they were sort of explaining this, that if you're in tier 4, you really can't go anywhere. But somebody in tier 2 could come to where you are, or they could travel abroad, but they can't go to a tier. It's very confusing. And so what happened last night was, as they announced these lockdowns, London, it was just like a mad rush for the train station and the airport to get out of London. And London's already, I was talking to someone in London Friday, and they said, you cannot believe what London is like. It's like the rapture happened. It's like everybody went. It's crazy. So these restrictions, and I jokingly told my friend, well, listen, I know that she said there's a mass exodus out of London. And I said, well, if the Thames divides, give me a call, because I want to talk about that. So, although having been on a boat on the Thames recently, you could maybe walk across it if you, because it's not a very clean body of water. This is also going to have a major economic impact. A lot of these things that have been restrictions, moratoriums put on foreclosures and evictions, these are going to really come to the forefront here soon, and a lot of people are going to be evicted. And then we have the vaccines. Everybody's getting a vaccine. I saw Benjamin Netanyahu was the first person in Israel this morning, but I'm also being sent things by email about, I think there's a hospital in Connecticut where 4 or 5 people went into like tachycardia events after getting the vaccine. So listen, this whole thing really bothers me because the testing has not really been sufficient. But what's going to happen, the governments aren't going to, I doubt that they'll mandate this. But if you want to go to a sports event, if you want to go to the movie theater, if you want to go to a restaurant, if you want your kid to go to a school, or you want to get on a plane or a train or something, you're going to have to show them proof of vaccination. And I just think that there's, just be careful because there's a lot of, people are going to have to make some very difficult decisions. So, boy. Slide 44. 71 to go. I'm not going to do all of them. Now this says, well, the troops, Pentagon said the troops won't be required to take the coronavirus vaccine. They'll distribute it, but they don't have to take it. Now this is an article, this is from the Australian, and this is something that's not gotten a lot of play. But essentially what the article says is the 2 million members of the Chinese Communist Party have infiltrated all levels of government, institutions, corporations, schools, and whatnot around the world. 2 million of them. We are under attack from China. This is very serious stuff. Now, you remember before the coronavirus thing became a thing earlier this year, it sort of started in March, the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Johns Hopkins University Medical School did a thing called Event 201. And what Event 201 was essentially a war game. So they had this coronavirus that had come from, I think, a pig in Argentina, and it spread around the world, and they talked, it was a war game. How are we going to respond to this if it happens? And here are the three main sponsors of that particular event. Well, this World Economic Forum has really been, as you know, we've talked about the Great Reset, we've talked about Klaus Schwab and what he said, and what the World Economic Forum did was they released a thing part of their Future series, Cybersecurity, Emerging Technology, and Systemic Risk. And then there they talk about things like artificial intelligence, they talk about quantum computing, they talk about digital identity. Because one of the goals of the World Economic Forum and a lot of these organizations is to have everybody to have a digital identity. Now that doesn't necessarily mean a chip. I know there's a digital identity project. I think it's funded in large part by the World Economic Forum and the Gates Foundation. Most people in the world have a digital identity. You should already know that. You don't have a chip, but everybody knows everything about you. All this information is stored and collected in data. I don't need to go into all the things. So here's what this says. The work has concluded, this is the World Economic Forum. The work has concluded that while progress has been made improving cybersecurity across the ecosystem, so we have the World Economic Forum involved in the war game for the coronavirus. Now we have these reports coming from the World Economic Forum about cybersecurity and cyber attacks. The increased complexity, pace, scale, and interdependence shown by our forward look at the technological trends will overwhelm many current defenses. At the same time, the scope of our cybersecurity activities beyond systems and networks must significantly expand in consideration of growing integrity concerns. For example, in the information layer and the integrity of AI algorithms. And so they're talking about this is a problem. And here's some of the acknowledgements page. They have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Global Identity Foundation, they're part of it. And what they did back in July was they did a war game, if you can believe this, called Cyber Polygon. It was international online training for raising global cyber resilience, called Cyber Polygon. Here's a little video from the Cyber Polygon. And they talk about these different things, international online cybersecurity training. So this is the war game that they did, organized by the World Economic Forum. Get ready, and you see that all the subtitles are in what? Russian, which is kind of interesting. And here's one of the first speakers at this. It's 3 or 4 hours. You can download it if you want. And here's one of the first speakers. He's got a Russian flag there. And then here's a guy from a bank, and he's at one of their cybersecurity centers, Serba Bank. And he's the host, and they're talking to all these Russian and Serbian guys and everything like that, which I find kind of interesting. Part of the war game was this clip of Klaus Schwab and what he said about cyber attacks.
As businesses and organizations are putting great efforts to serve their customers, deliver essential services, and protect their employees amidst the pandemic, cyber criminals have also been quick to exploit the increased vulnerabilities and the increased use that came along. The World Economic Forum recently published the COVID-19 Risks Outlook, the third greatest concern for companies surveyed is the increase of cyber attacks. We all know, but still pay insufficient attention to the frightening scenario of a comprehensive cyber attack, which would bring to a complete halt to the power supply, transportation, hospital services, our society as a whole. The COVID-19 crisis would be seen in this respect as a small disturbance in comparison to a major cyber attack.
So what Klaus said was, listen, this cyber attack stuff, so they do the war game for the COVID thing. Now they're doing a war game for cyber attack. So they did the war game, and we had some issues with the COVID thing, right? We're still dealing with those. And then we had this week, the headlines, there was a massive cyber attack on the United States. I'll play a clip from Lou Dobbs in just a moment, but people think it came from Russia or China or a combination of the two, but perhaps 18,000 companies, government agencies, and entities have been affected. This has been going on for months. Some things have had to be taken offline that are used by our defense establishment, the SIPRNet it's called, and they may have to rebuild it. It could take months or years to get everything back. And the concern is we don't know exactly what they did. We just know they did a lot of things. And some have been describing it as an act of war. And you're going to see a lot of different things in the government. Some people will downplay it. Other people will say this is incredibly serious. I think it's very, very serious. I don't know exactly how it all plays out. I don't know if this is just an attempt to sort of do forward activity in event that there's a war later, or if this is part of the war. But this is serious stuff. Here's a computer expert on Lou Dobbs the other night.
All of this former senior State Department advisor, cybersecurity expert, Morgan Wright. I don't recall a single time previous to this in which the U.S. government has said this is a grave, grave attack on the United States, and they make it clear at the Department of Homeland Security that they have no capacity to stop it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, Lou, anytime you call a meeting on Saturday of the National Security Council, it's serious. I mean, this is almost like a prelude to war. So what you were just saying earlier and what you reported on, not only were the government agencies hit, we've got Lockheed Martin, we've got companies like FireEye, very
So I'll be back in a second. I have a fairly good laptop, but it's a few years old now, so it just, I do a lot of videos and graphics, and it just is too much for the system. So it'll take a minute to get up. But anyway, just to summarize what this guy says, we've had a massive attack on our computers and cyber facilities in the United States, including the Nuclear Agency, the Treasury. I'm not sure about the Federal Reserve, but I'm not liking what this is doing right at the moment. Boy, I've got some great videos too in here. Okay, let's see if it comes back up this time. So my computer needs a healing. It could be somebody's hacking it too. I can't, dismiss that possibility. So we had the cyber attack. This is pretty serious stuff. Apologize for the delay here as this tries to come back up. Okay, now I got to my login screen. So take it just a second here to finish. So we'll get back to the and now it's going to open up all these things that I had shut down. So give me a minute here. Okay. Boy, I didn't realize I had that much. I don't know if you're ever doing this. Sometimes I'm running around and I say I better close down some of these things in my my iPhone, and I have like 47 apps open. So I know I have a problem, but I can handle it. Okay, here we go. Hang on. Boy, goodness. I thought I'd shut all this stuff down before I came up here. Okay, so we'll get back. So the cyber thing is a really big deal, but I don't know what the take of this is, but Robert C. O'Brien, the national security advisor, he was in the Middle East doing some trips with Jared and that type of thing, and he came back. He cut his trip short, which is very unusual. Look, I want to talk about a couple things, one thing in particular, but just a couple other things peripheral. Turkey continues to be a problem. Turkey is making inroads now like, oh, we want to reconcile with Israel. We want to be nice with Israel. I showed you this publication that they put out last week. But as Seth Fransman in the Jerusalem Post notes the other day, Turkish media vowing to take over Tel Aviv is no longer abnormal rhetoric. And what they've done is they've had these Zoom conferences and stuff that Turkey has hosted, that Erdogan has participated in, that are essentially like, we're going for Al-Aqsa and taking over Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And we can do it. The Arabs, they're not very good at it. And I played this thing last week where Erdogan had gone to Azerbaijan, had a big thing there with the president of Azerbaijan about the war that had been there, taken place a lot with Turkish intervention. And he essentially said, well, Azerbaijan and Turkey might be two states, but we're one people. That was the rhetoric that he used at this event. And he gave a long speech. He talked about this kind of bizarre poem that he cited. But anyway, he did that in the capital of Azerbaijan. Turkey is now being sanctioned by the Europeans. And even Iran has been taking on Erdogan. Here's a little graphic from the, they're taking that Turkish ship that goes around the Eastern Mediterranean. And they're showing that the sanctions of the EU will be an anchor against that. Okay, that's an article in the Times about the attack. And the editorial, global economic reset is not as simple as it sounds. This is all very complex stuff that's going on. So now I want to talk about Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords. Now there's a lot of theory about, or a lot of discussion, what's going to happen if Trump doesn't continue in office, Biden comes in, what will happen to the Abraham Accords and the normalization processes that have been started with these countries. And I personally think that the configuration of countries and Psalm 83, I think there's a lot of prophetic significance to these accords. I don't necessarily trust the Saudis. So let me just give you a little history of one aspect of this that indicates to me that Saudi Arabia is going to push forward with normalization and becoming part of the Abraham Accords, regardless of whether Trump continues in office and regardless of whether Jared Kushner is involved because of the pressure. Now, the House of Saud, this is going to be a quick synopsis of the history of Saudi Arabia. Ibn Saud was the first king of Saudi Arabia. He really declared himself king about 1932. He had a lot of conflict before that with other tribes in that region. He was able to consolidate power in the Arabian Peninsula. One of the people that he had a problem with or conflict with was the Sheriff of Mecca. That was the great or great-great-grandfather of King Abdullah II of Jordan. So the Hashemites controlled Mecca and Medina. The Sauds took them over, and that's why the kings of Saudi Arabia now are the guardians of the two holy mosques. That's one of their titles. So Ibn Saud had dozens of sons. He had many, many wives, and he probably fathered well over 100 children. So he died in 1953, and since 1953, you can go through the list here. In the first tier, the grayed out people are people that are dead. But the first 6 on the left on that row, those were the kings of Saudi Arabia from 1952, 53, when Ibn Saud died, until 2015. In 2015, so the last king was this guy, Abdulaziz, and he died in 2015. Before he died in 2012, he appointed Salman bin Abdulaziz, and most of these kings came from Ibn Saud's favorite wife. But there are thousands of Saudi princes and princesses now. I mean, you would need if you tried to have them over for Thanksgiving dinner and doing social distancing, you couldn't get them in Ohio State Stadium. That's how many there are. So he appointed him crown prince in 2012, and when Abdulaziz died, King Salman became king in 2015. Now, during this period of time, shortly after he became king, Mohammed bin Salman was not yet crown prince, but he came out with this Vision 2030 thing. And they put up a website. It was announced by him, introduced by him in 2016. And Mohammed bin Salman was appointed crown prince in 2017. That happened a few weeks after Trump had gone to Saudi Arabia on his trip, where he went to Saudi Arabia in May of 2017 and then to Jerusalem and Israel. And so Mohammed bin Salman was appointed. Originally, bin Salman had appointed Mohammed bin Nayef as his crown prince, but then he appointed Mohammed bin Salman, because that's his son. The other guy was the son of another person in the Saudi royal family. So now you have Mohammed bin Salman, And what he did in November 17 was, if you could back that out, Brian, he took over, he did that detention where he took a bunch of princes and businessmen, including when he was visiting, the prime minister of Lebanon was detained until they paid essentially bail money to get out of the Ritz-Carlton where they were being held. Not exactly the worst prison in the world, but nevertheless, prison is prison. And so the guy here in the second tier down, Alaouid, who's one of the richest people in the world, maybe in the top 60 richest people in the world, owns a lot of hotels, Twitter, Apple, very sophisticated investor. He essentially paid a $6 billion ransom to get out of the detention. The prime minister of Lebanon Hariri paid about $7 billion. And so Mohammed bin Salman has been very aggressive in what he's done. Now, recently in the Al-Akhbar newspapers in Lebanon, and I'm only trying to set up a context for the normalization process. There have been a lot of articles in Al-Akhbar, which is essentially a Hezbollah mouthpiece. And of course, Hezbollah is pro-Iranian, and they hate Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis. They're at war, essentially. So they had an article, but this is actually a pretty good article. The title of the article is, the headline on the front page, and then the interior article is, "A Seventh Year of Impotence, the End of bin Salman's Ambitions." So what they do is they look, the Saudis released their budget this week, and they're having problems. They're having revenue problems. Their sovereign wealth fund is estimated in 2019 to have been at $125 billion. And by the end of 2021, it will be down to about 75 billion. So it'll drop 50 billion out of 125 billion in just 2 years. Part of that is because oil revenue has dropped, and oil prices now are around $50. We know what happened earlier this year. They were down, sometimes even negative there for a short period of time. And this has had a huge impact because Saudi Arabia really needs oil to be around $70 a barrel. Right now it's at 50, and that's a rise from in the 30s and 40s. They're having severe economic trouble, but bin Salman wants to change things. He's been very active in changing things. I don't think one of these things where I just have too much. This has been very interesting. And the article at the bottom of the right-hand page is titled, "The End of bin Salman's Ambitions, What Concessions Should Be Made." Now, one of the things that Mohammed bin Salman wants to do is he wants to build this city of Neom, the green area here. You see Egypt there, the Sinai Peninsula coming down. You see the Gulf of Aqaba to the right, the Red Sea to the left, goes up to the Suez Canal. This Neom is going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars. They've already started constructing it. They're already having meetings in some places. But this is why I think there's going to be the normalization process is going to continue because of bin Salman's desire to build Neom and other things. So historically what happened was that back in the 1950s, there was meetings in Paris because there was conflict developing between Israel and Jordan and Israel and Egypt. And so Shimon Peres went to Paris to meet with these people. And one of the things that was hurting Israel was that the straits, they're called the Tarin Straits, T-A-R-I-N. I'll show you a little bit about that more in a moment. So Nasser had essentially cut off Israeli access to the Gulf of Aqaba and access to the Red Sea. And Israel did not do it. So that red line there, that's the straits, the Tarin Straits, T-A-R-I-N. And that became a big deal. In fact, that was one of the things that led to the 1967 Six-Day War, because Israel was cut off from the sea access there. They could not go down to Eilat and ship things, and they couldn't get into the Suez Canal. And part of the reason, that's King Hussein and that's Nasser, they went to war. They started war against Israel, and we know the results of that. The Six-Day War eventually resulted in Israel taking back a large portion of Israel. Nasser continued on as the president of Egypt. This is just sort of a little summary. He removed the peacekeepers. He shut down the Tarim Straits. And that eventually, all this stuff led to war. And as a result of the war, Israel ended up with a lot more land. It was an incredible military achievement. Israel more than doubled, maybe tripled its size. They took over the Sinai Peninsula. They took over the Golan Heights. They took over what was called the West Bank, which had been under Jordanian control. There was never a Palestinian country. So there were meetings and everything. Eventually what happened was that there were, I got in the wrong spot here. So Nasser was defeated in the 67 war. He went on television and said, I'm quitting, I'm humiliated and all this, but they wanted him to stay in place. And so in 1970, they had an Arab League summit. And at that summit, Nasser had some chest pains and he died. And he was replaced by Anwar Sadat. And this is during periods of times where they're negotiating, trying to get Israel to give back the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights. So there's a lot of shuttle diplomacy going on and that sort of thing. And it's interesting that, so you have this, you have Nasser replaced by Anwar Sadat. And then so Anwar Sadat then gets involved with the U.S. and Jimmy Carter to enact the Camp David Accords. And one of the main things in these Camp David Accords was, one, the recognition of Israel. But the other thing, too, was giving Israel sort of veto power over anything that happens with regard to the Tarim Straits. And here's the signing ceremony at the White House in 1979, the signing of the Camp David Accords. And I think they all got the Nobel Peace Prize for that. It was one of Jimmy Carter's achievements. Now, what happened after that, of course, was that the Sinai Peninsula was given back. The Golan Heights was not, but Egypt got it back, and Egypt recognized Israel as a state. A lot of people didn't like that. There was a lot of protest. Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981 and replaced by Hosni Mubarak, who continued in power in Egypt for 30 years, up until in the Arab Spring, and he was put out of office by the Muslim Brotherhood. The Arab Spring started 9 years ago this week, by the way, if you're keeping track. So very interesting, and now we have al-Sisi, who's in charge of Egypt. And we had this, I always found this picture kind of creepy, the glowing orb thing in Riyadh at some security center with Trump and bin Salman. And of course, she had a lot of other people there who met there in May of 2017 before Trump went to Israel, flew directly from Saudi Arabia to Israel, which is kind of a big deal. That just doesn't happen. And you see all the Arab leaders there. So where we are later in 2017, the Jerusalem Post published an article about the Tarim Straits and these islands that are there at the mouth of the Tarim Straits and why they're strategically important. And Israel has essentially veto control over these. And that was in late 2017. And now this is the time when bin Salman's coming out saying, I'm going to build Neom. I'm going to build this great big city here on the Red Sea, on that part. But one of the things that bin Salman wants to do is he wants to build a bridge across these straits to connect, well, that's in the Persian Gulf. Here we go. when you get up into this area here of the Sinai Peninsula, he wants to build a bridge from Saudi Arabia across the Tarim Straits to the Sinai Peninsula. That's a big deal for him. That he thinks that's part of what he wants for Tarim. But what's the problem? The problem is that Israel has essentially a veto over that. So now that bin Salman and Saudi Arabia are in economic crisis, bin Salman sees NEOM and his Vision 2030 as a way to salvage his legacy, even though he's not king yet. And so here's the Straits of Tarim. They want to build a bridge. The cost of the bridge there, it's about 10 kilometers across. It would cost somewhere around $10 billion to build in today's dollars. They've been talking about this since 2012. But Israel's always sort of held the trump card. But now bin Salman wants this because this is becoming increasingly important to him. So what does he have to do to get on board with this? Normalize things with Israel would be the first start. So that's why I think that this normalization process is a train that's gathering a lot of momentum. The other thing that bin Salman also wants to do, that he needs Israel's cooperation for, is to build, you see the check line here, the dotted dash line? He wants to build a railway to help make Saudis more of a hub, and it would go to this area of NEOM and Jordan and on to Haifa. Well, that's only going to happen if there's normalization and that sort of thing. And then at top of that this week, you see this. Now this is an article, Palestinian Authority, Jordan, and Egypt are all now calling for peace talks with Israel. My friends, I want you to understand, this is not something to dismiss or to say, oh, it's nice that they're entering into a peace accords and the Abraham Accords. I dearly believe, strongly believe, that this is very significant prophetically. And we're going to be talking a lot about this. There is also this article in the JCPA, interesting article, called The Temple Mount in Jerusalem, From Religious Conflict to Religious Normalization. Because that's sort of the heart of all of this, is what's going to happen to the Temple Mount. And I can just tell you that there are changes happening in the Arab world, and these people wanting to, because they fear Iran, they want to normalize things with Israel because that's a defense alignment. Now, do I believe that they're going to change all of their things? No, I don't. But there are other changes that are going on. I didn't have time to put it in my slides. There's an organization called Impact SE, IMPACT, capital S, capital E. What they do is they monitor what's in textbooks given to children in Arab countries relative to Israel. And what they found, they just released a report within the last week or so about what has happened in Saudi Arabia. This is very significant. Starting in about 2016, certain things that were virulently anti-Israel started to be removed from Saudi children textbooks. And that has continued, and in fact, this year, they removed from the textbooks the hadith that talked about, the Islamic hadith that talks about, if you, in the end times, in this apocalyptic battle, if the trees will tell you, hey, there's a Jew hiding behind me, you can come here and kill him. They've taken that out of the textbooks now. So there's been this trend. There's still some things in there that are pretty bad, but there's been this almost purging of Saudi textbooks of this type of stuff. And so now this article at JCPA, you can get on jcpa.org. It's a very well done article. It says here, a first look at the new and different Muslim tourism expected to reach Israel following peace treaties with the UAE and Bahrain. The controversy has been dividing the Muslim world for years around visits to occupied Jerusalem and how the normalization agreements reshuffled the cards in this Muslim domestic debate. fact, I saw an interview. He's a Facebook friend. He interviewed some UAE guys and said, "Hey, you're here in Israel. What do you think?" And the UAE guys goes, "You know, you should fear for your life because you're in Israel, right? We hate Arabs." And the guys, they started laughing and they said, "No, you know, this is a pretty open, tolerant place. We feel great. It's a very wonderful society that you have here." Of course, I don't think he dove into the Knesset and what's going on in the Knesset, but that's another subject. But there are even some suggestions that I've seen circulating around that there are these appendices to the Accords that are being worked on. They're secret now, but they will deal with what is the relationship of Muslim countries and Israel to the Temple Mount. Now, this is very significant. Now, there's nothing concrete yet, but there's buzz about that there are things taking place in this regard. And you see the Arabs, they're like, we want to go there, we want to go up on the Temple Mount. Now, the Palestinians, they're like fighting it. You know, oh, you can't do this, you know, you don't have any right, you're just Jew lovers and all this sort of thing. And they are very negative. But here, for example, here's an editorial cartoon. And it's sort of a slam at the normalization between Israel and Morocco, the Morocco Gate. And you see how it's the handlebar mustache and stuff to block other people here, and you see the conniving Israel and the United States, Uncle Sam in the corner here about restricting Muslim access. So that's part of the narrative. The other narrative is, let's open it up. It's a house of prayer for all. It should be a place of prayer for all nations. And I'm just telling you, there are trends that I see happening in this regard. So this is something very significant to watch. At the same time, of course, you have Iran continues to be a problem. There was a meeting that Ayatollah Khamenei, who a week ago was reported dead or near death, he did the meeting. He came out and he gave a talk, you know, and he talked about Martyr Soleimani defeated the front of arrogance both during his life and with his martyrdom. The hero behind this major task is General Soleimani. He called him the martyrdom of General Soleimani as a historic incident. He is a national hero for Iranians and the Islamic nation. That's why Iranians from different backgrounds, even those least expected, honor him. He was the one who promoted the model of resistance among Islamic nations. So he gave him this. Now, there's also reports that they're building more underground nuclear facilities. This is all coming in, this is the way they negotiate. And I will remind you of this thing that had been put up on by the Ayatollah Khamenei, this graphic that shows the Temple Mount, what he wants to do with the Temple Mount. And you see the picture of, let me blow this up here. Soleimani and the other guy who was killed, the Iraqi militia head of the Shia militias in Iraq, who was also assassinated along with Soleimani. Their pictures there on the side of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this is a graphic that kind of shows you how the Iranians view this mosque. And then there's other people there holding posters of other martyrs. And then over here you see the Hezbollah flag and other flags. So this is a big deal. Now, there's also some things going on in Iran. Iran is being very brutal right now. And part of this, I think, is they're trying to set everybody up for their negotiating to get the JCPOA back and get rid of the sanctions. And they say there's no difference between Biden and Trump. So this is the way they negotiate. They do these things to force an issue. So here's this guy. He was a journalist, and he was lured back by someone. He had written about ISIS and other things. He was seemed to be a pretty good guy, but he was lured back to Iraq by a lady or something about seeing his father or a relative. And he got there, Iran kidnapped him, and they took him to Iran, and they executed him this week. This is how the Iranian government operates. It's pretty brutal. The other thing I read this week was remember the wrestler, the world champion wrestler in Iran that had become part of a protester? Not only did they tortured him horribly in prison, they executed him, and now they've destroyed his grave and arrested his family. This is how the Iranian regime operates. So all of this is happening at the same time. Let me see if I got one thing here. Now, U.S.-Iran tensions are destabilizing Kurdistan. And then this other article, and I'll finish up with this, is an article in MediaLine. And it talks about a new Middle East you didn't see coming. It's it was published on the Jerusalem Post website. You can also find it at MediaLine, which is a good source for Middle East information and news. Very reliable. And this guy writes an editorial, and he says, you didn't see this coming, did you? All of this normalization that's happening. So the only thing I'm trying to get you to see today is that this is operating on many, many levels. It involves the Temple Mount, it involves Israel, the Arab countries, and I do think that this is, especially at the time that it's happening, in the midst of this, the lockdowns and the pandemic and the rollout of these vaccines, there's all this stuff going on in the Middle East that we sometimes forget about and ignore. And the guy starts off this article and he says, did you really think that Sudan and Morocco and Bahrain and UAE, all of this in a couple months period, are going to normalize things with Israel? And shouldn't you expect that more things are going to happen? And what happens, he says here, this is kind of interesting. So he kind of goes, this is like a war game scenario that he writes. Could these things actually happen? What's the response? Frustrated by decades of Palestinian obstinacy and eager to cement new Middle East alliances, moderate Arab nations were finally moving to put the Israeli-Palestinian issue behind them and remove that thorn from beneath their saddle. They launched a two-pronged invasion, a sort of pincer operation, but not the classic kind. One Arab army entered Gaza from Egypt, while the other rolled into the West Bank from Jordan. Israel played no active role in the invasion. It had already agreed to the terms of an arrangement, maintaining control of its main settlement blocks while evacuating some of the smaller outposts in the heart of the West Bank, and finally received an internationally recognized border on its eastern front. No one was calling this peace. The new Middle East was not one of peaceful relations among all its nations. Instead, it was a battleground mostly of Shiite Muslims on the one side and Sunni Muslims on the other. And part of this comes about because they're concerned about Iran and its nuclear ambitions and its development of missile capabilities. All I can say is this, is watch what's going on in the Middle East. This is very significant in my view. I don't know how quickly things will come together. The fact that there might be secret parts of these Abraham Accords is no surprise to me. I know that the predominant view in Bible prophecy is that the confirmation of the covenant will be something like you saw at Camp David. They'll stand on the White House lawn and everybody will shake hands and, well, in this age it would be fist bumping and at social distance, proper social distancing. But this will be a public event. But these things often happen in secret. And so I don't know that when this confirmation of a covenant happens, it's going to be this huge public event. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says the revelation of the Antichrist comes when he goes into the temple. Now, I think people will have a pretty good idea, but ultimately you're not going to know because, look, there are many peace agreements right now. You got Oslo, you got the Abraham Peace Initiative, you got the P4 plus or P5 plus 1 or P4 plus 1, and you got Abraham. So there's all this stuff going on, and we don't know which one of these is going to be the hub. I think the Abraham Accords are very significant, and we cannot ignore that possibility. So it's an incredibly exciting time to be alive. And as I look through these things, it's just astounding to me, all the things that are coming together. I mean, I could talk hours on AI and technology and that type of thing. It's stunning. So we'll just have to sit here and, so do I think 2021 will be less chaotic than 2020? No, I don't. I don't think we're going back to the great days of February 2020. I just don't think it's going to happen. But look, God's in control, right? And we have an obligation. When we're seeing all these things happening, we really need to get out there and tell people about Jesus, that Jesus is your only hope of salvation. All this other stuff, devil's, right now what he's doing is he's throwing everything against the wall, hoping some of it sticks. I mean everything. And we know that God's in control, and God will come back. Jesus will come back and take care of all of it. So let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word. Thank you for giving us insight into some of the things that we can expect to happen in the end times. We pray that you will help us to focus on our mission as a church and body of believers, and that we will work together towards that goal and not let divisions occur like I see happening day by day by day, by hour by hour by hour. Help us to be unified in what we are to do, all to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.